The knock came while my husband was gone, not hurried, not uncertain. One sharp, deliberate knock that cut through the quiet of our living room like it knew exactly what it was doing. When I opened the door, an elderly woman stood there holding an envelope thick with cash and a smile that felt practiced, not kind. She said my name before I could ask hers. That was the moment I understood she had come prepared. She did not come to ask for help. She did not come to explain herself. She came to make an offer. An offer to buy something she believed I would surrender without a fight. And before I could shut the door, she told me why my husband was not home, and what he had already promised her. In that instant, I understood I had only two choices. I could break quietly and let them take everything, or I could stay standing and make sure this decision cost someone far more than they expected. If you've ever been underestimated, erased, or betrayed by someone who believed you would stay silent, stay with me. Because this is not a story about anger. It is about what happens when patience finally ends and someone learns the cost of underestimating the wrong woman. My name is Alina Whitmore, and I was 34 years old when my life split cleanly down the middle. Before that afternoon, I believed I understood the shape of my marriage, the rhythm of my days, and the man sleeping beside me every night. After that afternoon, I understood something else entirely. I understood how quietly betrayal can move. How it can wear the face of normalcy. How it can sit at your dinner table and smile back at you. I lived in a modest 2-story house on a calm street where nothing ever seemed urgent. The kind of neighborhood where dogs barked at the same time every evening and the mail carrier waved like he had known you forever. It felt safe, predictable, almost boring. I had once thought boring was a blessing. That belief would not survive what came next. My husband, Mark, was 39. He worked in commercial real estate, wore pressed shirts even on weekends, and spoke with the confidence of someone who believed the world owed him cooperation. People liked him quickly. That had always unsettled me, even before I had a reason to question it. Charm is not always kindness. Sometimes it is just polish hiding sharp edges. I worked from home as a freelance editor. Words were my job. Precision mattered to me. Truth mattered to me. I spent my days untangling other people's mistakes, making their stories cleaner and more honest than they had been when they arrived on my screen. I never imagined I would fail to edit my own life. Our marriage looked solid from the outside. Friends said we were stable. Family said we were lucky. We hosted holidays. We laughed at dinners. We shared routines that felt earned. Morning coffee, evening walks, quiet nights on the couch with the television playing softly in the background. I told myself that love did not need fireworks. I told myself consistency was enough. Sometimes, though, when Mark thought I was not watching, his phone would tilt away from me. Sometimes his answers came half a second too late. Sometimes his smiles felt rehearsed. I noticed these things. I always noticed. I just did not yet understand their weight. That afternoon began like any other. Gray sky, soft rain tapping against the windows. Mark kissed my cheek, grabbed his jacket, and said he was running to the store. His voice was casual, almost careless. He did not look back when he closed the door. Fear the house exhaled once he was gone. I remember standing in the kitchen, staring at the kettle, feeling a strange pressure in my chest. Not fear, not yet. Just a sense that something was slightly off. Like the air before a storm when the clouds have not fully gathered. Then came the knock. It was not loud, not urgent. It was measured, intentional, the kind of knock delivered by someone who expected the door to open. When I pulled it open, I saw her. She was elderly, perhaps in her late 60s or early 70s. Dressed in a cream-colored coat that looked expensive without being flashy. Her silver hair was pulled into a neat bun. Her posture was straight. Her eyes were sharp. Too sharp for someone her age. She smiled as if she had practiced it. She said my name, not as a question, as a statement. My stomach dropped. Very few people knew where I lived. Even fewer would show up unannounced. My mind raced through possibilities, none of them comforting. She introduced herself as Margaret Hale. The name meant nothing to me then. It would come to mean everything later. She held out an envelope. Thick, heavy. I could tell without touching it that it was full of cash. She did not rush. She'll let me notice. Let me process. Let curiosity do the work for her. She asked if we could talk privately. I remember thinking, why would a stranger with money want to talk to me? I stepped aside and let her in. The living room felt smaller with her in it. Sat down without being invited, placing the envelope on the coffee table between us like an offering. Or a challenge. Her gaze moved slowly around the room, taking inventory. The couch. The framed wedding photo on the wall. The small details that said, someone lives here. Someone is loved here. She nodded to herself. That was the first moment I felt real fear. She told me she was not there to cause trouble, that she valued discretion, that she believed in resolving matters cleanly. Her voice was calm, controlled, almost soothing. It made my skin crawl. Then she told me why she was there. She said my husband had made promises. Promises he could not keep without my cooperation. Promises involving property, money, and a future that did not include me in the way I believed it did. I laughed. Not because it was funny, it's because my mind refused to accept the words as real. I told her she had the wrong house, the wrong woman, the wrong story. Her smile tightened. She slid the envelope closer to me. She said this was an advance, a courtesy, a way to make what was coming easier. I did not touch it. Inside my head, a voice whispered, "This is not a misunderstanding." She looked directly at my wedding photo and said something that still echoes in my memory. She said, "You seem reasonable. I trust you will make the right decision. Decision. About my life, my marriage, my future." In that moment, the stakes crystallized. This was not gossip. This was not suspicion. This was a transaction happening without my consent. And someone believed I was the obstacle that could be bought. I felt small, insulted, invisible. But beneath that, something else began to stir. Anger, quiet, focused, dangerous. Because if they thought I was unaware, if they thought I was powerless, if they believed I would simply accept what they had planned without me, then they had made a mistake that would cost them far more than money. And as Margaret stood to leave, pausing at the door as if she owned the place, I realized something with absolute clarity. This was only the beginning. And by the time it ended, none of us would walk away unchanged. The days after Margaret's visit became unbearable. The house felt different, heavier. Every corner seemed to hum with tension I could not name. Mark's behavior changed, though I cannot say exactly when the shift began. It was subtle at first, a glance that lingered too long, a tone that suggested irritation I had not earned. I caught him speaking into his phone in whispers, closing doors behind him as if secrets could be locked away. My heart sank each time I saw it. Something had arrived in our life that did not belong to me, something insidious. I tried to convince myself it was paranoia. Maybe I am imagining it. Maybe I am being overly sensitive, but the envelope? The way Margaret had looked at our wedding photo, the words she had said, they were not hallucinations. They were threats disguised as civility. And I hated the way I could feel them pressing against my chest like invisible hands. Then came the first real act that I could not ignore. Mark began hiding small amounts of money. Cash he had always left in the kitchen drawer now disappeared. At first, it was almost laughable. I asked him about it casually. He shrugged, said I was overreacting, that I worried too much, but I could see the hesitation in his eyes. I could see the calculations running across his face. He was thinking of something else, something he did not want me to know. I hated it. Hated the dishonesty that had seeped into our home. Hated the way my stomach churned every time he walked past me without saying a word. I began noticing every detail. The way his shoes were never in the closet where they belonged. The way his coat was tossed on the armchair instead of the hook by the door. The receipts hidden in pockets, folded too neatly. Each small thing became a puzzle piece. And I was determined to see the full picture. It escalated further one night when he came home later than usual. Rain hammered the windows. Thunder rolled low and slow, a warning I could feel in my bones. He was wet. His coat clung to him like a second skin. He smiled at me, a smile that once would have reassured me. But not now. Not with the tension that had settled like dust in our living room. I asked him where he had been. He said he had taken a detour home, a casual lie. And in that moment, I saw the way his hands trembled, the hesitation, the avoidance. My pulse quickened. I realized then that Margaret had not been the only one involved. He was a willing participant. I began to track his patterns. Every night, every trip out of the house, every whispered phone call. My mind was alive with suspicion, but it was not irrational. There were signs everywhere. Receipts for restaurants he had never mentioned. Messages on his phone that he refused to show me. Subtle hints of someone else's presence in our life. I felt a tightening in my chest whenever I walked past the kitchen and noticed the envelope Margaret had left still sitting on the counter untouched. It mocked me. Reminded me that the fight was not yet mine. The tension between us grew. Every conversation felt like walking on broken glass. I began to speak less, to observe more. He grew impatient with my silence. That only fueled my determination. I had been underestimated again, and I could not allow it to continue. Then the lies became bolder. One afternoon, I found a text message on his phone, a message I was not meant to see. My hands shook as I read the words. They were from Margaret. Demands, instructions, monetary transfers. Mark's name tied directly to her schemes. The realization hit me like a punch. He was complicit. He had never loved me in the way I thought he had. He had only tolerated me. And the betrayal was not one moment. It was a pattern, a deliberate, methodical pattern. I confronted him. My voice trembled, but I held it steady. I demanded answers. He laughed, a low, dismissive laugh that should have angered me more than it did. He said I was imagining things, that I was being paranoid, that I needed to calm down. But he did not deny the truth. That is when I realized the scope of what I was up against. The web had already been spun. I was inside it. Sleep became impossible. Every night I lay awake listening to the rain, listening to the creaks of the house, wondering what they were planning next. Margaret had not just arrived once. She had returned, leaving small hints. Payments that arrived in unmarked envelopes. Calls that Mark answered behind closed doors. Every time he walked away from me, I felt the sharp edge of exclusion, of powerlessness. I hated feeling powerless. I hated feeling blind to what was happening under my own roof. The breaking point arrived on a Sunday morning. I woke early, feeling the sunlight on my face, deceptively calm. Mark was in the kitchen, making coffee, humming softly. It should have been ordinary, but the living room told a different story. The envelope had been moved, not gone, not opened, just moved. As if marking territory, my mind raced. This is not just about money. This is about control. And he was letting her dictate the terms of our home, our life. I asked him where he had been the night before. He said he had gone for a walk. I asked him about the text messages. He said I had no right to pry. The calm in his voice made me angrier than his lies ever could. It was not fear anymore. It was fury. The kind of fury that makes you start noticing every small injustice, every small slight, every act of betrayal. I began planning small tests, leaving notes he could not ignore. Asking questions that required truth. Watching him squirm when he realized I was paying attention, each test revealed more. Margaret's influence. Mark's submission. Their plan, however carefully hidden, began to unravel under the weight of my observation. And yet, the more I learned, the more dangerous it felt. I could not confront her directly. I could not call her out without risking the escalation I feared. But I could wait. I could watch. I could plan. Because they had underestimated me. They had believed that silence would equal compliance. That fear would keep me small, that a woman could be bought or intimidated without consequence. They were wrong. Every day that passed, I became more certain, more vigilant, more determined. The storm was coming, and I was already standing in the center of it, ready to take control. Because betrayal, I realized, can only persist for so long before the reckoning begins. And mine would be devastating. I woke that morning with a sense of quiet rage I could not shake. The sunlight poured through the blinds in long golden bars, cutting across the living room like a warning. Mark was gone already, leaving only the faint smell of his cologne lingering on the couch cushions, a ghostly reminder that he had been here. I looked at the envelope Margaret had left, still untouched. My fingers itched to pick it up, to destroy it, to do something that would reclaim the power they had stolen. But I did not. I waited, watching, thinking, planning. The house was silent, too silent. I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator, the gentle tick of the wall clock, every noise amplified in the absence of normal life. And in that silence, I realized something terrifyingly clear. I could not trust anyone. Not Mark, not Margaret. Not anyone who claimed to care about me. They had all played a part in a story that had made me feel small, helpless, replaceable. I replayed the events in my mind. Margaret's smile, the weight of the envelope. Mark's dismissive laugh when I confronted him. Every single moment was a dagger twisting slowly in my chest. And yet, amid the anger and the fear, a strange clarity settled in. I understood what I had to do. I had to take control. The first flicker of resolve came as a thought. They think I will break. They have underestimated me. They think I will accept this. They are wrong. My pulse quickened at the thought. I could feel it in my fingers, in the tightening of my chest, in the way my legs trembled as I walked to the window. The world outside seemed oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. Cars rolled past, people walked dogs, the neighbors' children laughed in the yard. Life continued, ignorant of the betrayal that had taken root in my home. I closed my eyes and pictured them both. Mark, with his rehearsed smiles and quiet lies. Margaret, with her controlled demeanor and icy determination. They had believed themselves untouchable. I had underestimated nothing, not anymore. I began to imagine scenarios, what I could do, how I could make them understand that power is not given freely, 'tis seized. The thought of turning the tables ignited something fierce inside me. My hands shook with anticipation. My heart thudded like a drumbeat warning of an approaching storm. I remembered the little ways Mark had betrayed me. Every secret, every hidden transaction, every moment of avoidance. They were breadcrumbs, and I would follow them. They had left a trail, and I would walk it, step by step, till the full picture revealed itself. The envelope sat on the coffee table, almost taunting me. I stared at it, imagining the look on Margaret's face if I refused it, if I returned it, if I used it against them. The possibilities spiraled through my mind, each one darker and more satisfying than the last. I felt a tight knot form in my stomach. I had to wait for the right moment. Patience would be my weapon. Observation, my shield. Strategy, my armor. I could not act recklessly. I would not allow emotions alone to guide me. Hours passed. I moved through the house with purpose, each step measured. I cleaned, organized, rearranged, as if preparing the battlefield. Every gesture was deliberate, every glance at the door a reminder that the storm would not wait forever. I was readying myself for war. Not a physical war, but a war of wits, of cunning, of justice earned through meticulous planning. I thought about the people who had underestimated me in life, friends who dismissed my opinions, colleagues who overlooked my talents, and now the two people I had trusted most. The anger that rose was hot and unrelenting, but beneath it a calm focus began to form. I will not be a victim anymore. The thought repeated itself like a mantra. I will not be a victim anymore. Then came the moment that broke something open completely. I received a text from Mark. Simple, casual. Margaret wants to meet tonight. She should stay home. I felt my stomach drop. Every instinct screamed that something dangerous was about to happen. Every fiber of my being demanded that I act, but I could not let them see my fear. I could not let them anticipate my moves. The quiet rage that had been simmering for weeks now roared into a blaze. I was done waiting silently. I was done being manipulated. I was done being underestimated. I spent the afternoon preparing, not for confrontation, not yet, for observation, for understanding, for gathering every piece of information that could tip the scales in my favor. Every word Mark spoke, every gesture Margaret made would be cataloged, analyzed, and used. They had left holes in their armor. I would exploit them. By evening, the tension in the house was suffocating. The air felt thick. My nerves were electric. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like a warning. The envelope sat between us, a silent witness to the war that was about to begin. I could feel it pulling at me, daring me to make a mistake. Mark came home late, dripping with rain, with a smirk that should have unsettled me. But it did not. I met his gaze evenly. I let no flicker of fear pass across my face. I would not give him the satisfaction. He handed me another envelope, smaller, a note attached. "Do not interfere." I read it slowly, savoring every word. The threat was clear. But the anger it ignited in me was greater than the fear. Every word was fuel. Every implication sharpened my resolve. I would interfere. I would take back control. I would show them exactly what it meant to underestimate me. The night settled around the house like a blanket heavy with foreboding. Thunder rolled in the distance. Rain pattered against the windows with urgent insistence. Inside, I felt a storm rising that mirrored the one outside, one I could not suppress. One I would not suppress. And then, in the quiet moments before darkness fully swallowed the day, I made a decision. I would not wait for them to strike again. I would not remain silent. I would not be a passive participant in this story any longer. I would act. The thought thrilled me, terrified me, empowered me. I did not yet know the full plan. I did not yet know the full consequences. But I knew one thing. I would not fail. I would turn their game against them. I would make them regret every moment they thought they had power over me. I would take back my life. The turning point was complete. The line had been drawn. The storm had begun. And by the time they realized what I was capable of, it would be too late. The plan did not arrive all at once. It formed slowly, like a photograph developing in a dark room. At first, there were only fragments, details, loose threads begging to be pulled. I let myself sit with them, turning each one over in my mind until patterns emerged. Because revenge rushed is revenge ruined. And I needed this to be flawless. I started with silence. Silence is powerful when people expect noise. I stopped questioning Mark. I stopped reacting. I smiled when he spoke. I nodded when he lied. I let him believe the threat had worked, that I was intimidated, that I was folding. Inside, I was sharpening knives. I watched everything. The way Mark checked his phone every 10 minutes. The way his jaw tightened when Margaret's name appeared on the screen. The way his confidence dissolved into obedience when he spoke to her. He was not a mastermind. He was a middleman, weak link pretending to be strong. That realization alone gave me leverage. Late at night, when he slept beside me, breathing slow and careless, I unlocked his phone. My hands were steady, calm, focused. I photographed everything. Messages, transfers, appointments, names, dates. Margaret was methodical but arrogant. She documented her moves because she believed no one would ever challenge her. People like her confuse wealth with invincibility. Every screenshot felt like oxygen. I copied files from his laptop while he showered. Contracts, emails, drafts of agreements that mentioned assets I recognized. Assets that legally required my signature. Assets he had no right to negotiate alone. My pulse raced as the truth came into focus. This was not just betrayal. This was attempted erasure. And Margaret was the architect. The next step required patience. I responded to her, not with anger, not with fear, with politeness. I sent a short message thanking her for her concern and asking to meet neutral ground. Public. She agreed immediately. That told me everything I needed to know. She believed she had already won. The cafe was quiet when I arrived. Soft jazz, warm lighting. The smell of roasted coffee beans hung heavy in the air. Margaret sat at a corner table, perfectly composed, hands folded neatly atop her purse. She smiled when she saw me, the same smile she had worn in my living room, controlled, superior. I smiled back. She spoke first, about practicality, about inevitability, about how situations like this always resolve the same way. She slid another envelope across the table, larger this time. Her fingers lingered on it, a silent reminder of her power. I did not touch it. I asked questions instead. Simple ones, curious ones, innocent ones. She answered them without hesitation. She liked the sound of her own voice. She explained her plans in broad strokes, careful but not cautious enough. She spoke as though I were already compliant, as though resistance had been removed from the equation. I nodded. I listened. I memorized every word. Then I said something that made her pause. I mentioned a detail she had not shared. It's a number, a location, a clause buried deep in a document she believed only Mark had seen. The shift was subtle, but I caught it. Her smile faltered. Just for a moment. That moment mattered. I excused myself to the restroom and sent everything to a secure cloud drive. Multiple backups, timed emails, dead man switches. If anything happened to me, the information would surface. That knowledge steadied me, grounded me. When I returned, Margaret was waiting, watching, calculating. I told her I needed time. She agreed, but her eyes hardened. She warned me gently, too gently. It was the kind of warning delivered by someone who has never been told no. That night, I confronted Mark. Not with tears, not with accusations, with evidence. I laid the printed screenshots on the table one by one. I watched his face drain of color, watched his bravado crumble. He tried to speak. I raised my hand. I told him exactly what would happen next. He would cooperate fully. He would follow my instructions to the letter, or everything would be exposed. To his employer. To the authorities. To the people Margaret relied on to maintain her pristine reputation. He agreed. Fear makes people honest. The execution unfolded quietly over the next 2 weeks. I scheduled meetings. I redirected funds. I signed documents he had forged without me. I contacted a lawyer Margaret had once dismissed as irrelevant. Turns out he was very interested in her activities. I recorded conversations, logged transactions. Built a case so airtight it could not be ignored. Margaret sensed the shift. She called more often. Her voice sharpened. The politeness vanished. She threatened, subtly at first, then openly. I let her. Every threat became evidence. The final step was the hardest. The calm before the release. I invited her back to my house, the same living room, the same couch, the same coffee table where she had once placed her envelope like a crown. She arrived confident. She left ruined. I slid my own envelope across the table. Inside were copies of everything, and a single document on top. A legal notice, official, filed. Irreversible, her face went pale. She tried to speak. I stood. I told her the transaction was over. The room was silent except for her breathing, sharp and uneven. Outside, rain began to fall, and I knew the storm had finally broken. Margaret did not speak at first. She stared at the documents in front of her as if they might rearrange themselves into something less catastrophic. The rain outside intensified, drumming against the windows in heavy, relentless sheets. The sound filled the silence she could not. I stood across from her, steady, breathing evenly, feeling something inside me loosen for the first time in weeks. Then she laughed. It was a brittle sound, forced, hollow. She said I was bluffing. I did not respond. I watched her hands instead. Kay trembled despite her effort to keep them still. Her fingers brushed the edge of the paper, then recoiled as if the ink itself might burn her. She finally looked up at me, really looked, and something shifted in her expression. The confidence she had worn like armor cracked, just slightly, but enough. She asked how I had done it. That was the moment I had been waiting for. I told her everything, not out of mercy, out of precision. I explained how Mark had underestimated me, how she had underestimated me, how every whispered call, every envelope, every threat had been cataloged, preserved, and duplicated. I told her about the lawyer, about the filings already submitted, about the regulatory bodies that would be very interested in her financial maneuvers, about the people in her own circle who would distance themselves the second this surfaced. Her face drained of color. She stood abruptly, chair scraping loudly against the floor. Her composure fractured completely then. She accused me of betrayal, irony dripping from every word. She called me ungrateful, small, dangerous. I smiled. I told her she had walked into my home and tried to buy my silence, that she had mistaken restraint for weakness, that she had assumed money could erase a woman who refused to disappear. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. Nothing came out. Mark stood in the doorway, pale, silent, reduced to a spectator in the wreckage he had helped create. He did not look at me. He could not. Shame sat on his shoulders like a weight he could no longer carry. Margaret turned to him, desperation flashing across her features. She demanded he say something, defend her, defend himself. He did not move. That was when I felt it. The release. A slow, spreading warmth in my chest. Relief. Validation. The quiet triumph of being seen at last. Not as an obstacle, not as collateral damage, but as the one holding the power. I told Margaret she had two choices. She could leave quietly, comply with the terms outlined in the notice, and accept the consequences that would follow. Or she could fight. If she chose the second option, everything would become public. Names, numbers, connections. Every carefully constructed illusion she had spent decades protecting would collapse in a matter of days. I stepped closer. I lowered my voice. I told her I had already won. She looked around the room as if searching for an exit that did not exist. The walls felt tighter, the air heavier. Rain thundered outside like applause for the moment she was finally losing control. Her shoulders sagged. She nodded once, defeated. She gathered her things with shaking hands. No longer the woman who had once knocked on my door with an envelope full of confidence and cash. At the threshold, she paused. She turned back, eyes sharp again, but this time filled with something else. Fear. She warned me that people like her did not forget. I met her gaze without blinking. I told her people like me did not need to. The door closed behind her with a finality that echoed through the house. The silence that followed was different. Clean, open, liberating. Mark tried to speak then. Apologies spilling out in fragments. Excuses, regrets, promises. He reached for me, hands outstretched, voice breaking. I stepped back, told him he had already made his choice. That loyalty, once broken, does not regenerate. That trust is not a renewable resource. He sank onto the couch, face buried in his hands. I felt no pity, only clarity. I walked into the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and drank slowly. My hands no longer shook. My breathing was calm. The storm inside me had passed, leaving behind a steady resolve. Later that night, after Mark packed a bag and left without another word, I stood alone in the living room. Rain continued to fall, softer now, as if exhausted by its own fury. I picked up the last remaining envelope Margaret had ever placed in my life. I tore it open. Cash spilled onto the table. I did not count it. I gathered it, carried it outside, and dropped it into the recycling bin. The sound it made as it landed was dull, insignificant, exactly what it deserved to be. I went back inside and locked the door. For the first time in a long time, the house felt like mine again. And somewhere deep inside, a voice whispered what I already knew. Justice had been served, not loudly, not cruelly, but completely. The house was quiet the next morning. It's too quiet. I walked through it slowly, letting my fingers brush the surfaces, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator, the subtle creak of the floorboards. Everything felt different, lighter yet heavier at the same time. It was as though the air had shifted, settling into a rhythm that belonged to me and me alone. I poured coffee, watching the steam curl upward in the soft morning light. I thought about Margaret, about Mark, about the audacity it had taken for them to believe they could manipulate my life, my home, my very sense of self. Their arrogance had been staggering. And now all of it had collapsed quietly under my patience, my observation, my determination. I had not needed to yell. I had not needed to strike. I had simply been vigilant and deliberate. Sitting by the window, I watched the rain soften, droplets gliding down the glass like tiny confessions. I realized something profound. Karma does not always arrive in the form of immediate retribution. Sometimes it waits, watches, gives you the space to plan, to learn, to understand exactly how to reclaim what was stolen. And when it comes, it is precise, swift, unyielding. I thought about Mark again, about how as Lee he had slipped from someone I loved into someone I barely recognized. The betrayal had not been subtle, but I had let him believe he had the upper hand. That was my strength. That had been the difference between their scheme succeeding and their ruin. In the end, their power was only an illusion. I had seen through it all along, but I had let them continue because timing matters more than impulse. The envelope, I had left it discarded outside. I had chosen symbolic action over petty attachment. Letting it go was more than practical, it was a declaration. Their currency, their threats, their manipulation, none of it mattered anymore. I had removed it from the equation. The air in the house carried a hint of freedom now, subtle but unmistakable. It clung to the curtains, lingered in the corners, and settled in my chest like a heartbeat I had thought lost. I realized that revenge is not about destruction. It is about restoration. Restoring your power, restoring your dignity, restoring your narrative. Margaret had left with fear, not because I had threatened her physically, but because I had outmaneuvered her psychologically. That is a lesson worth remembering. When someone underestimates you, when someone tries to erase you, the strongest response is not violence. It is control. Calm, clarity, precision. I walked through the living room, stopping to touch the frames on the wall. Our wedding photos stared back at me, unchanged. It had once symbolized what I believed to be love. Now it symbolized awareness, understanding, and ultimately triumph. I did not feel the need to destroy it, not yet, for destruction has its place. But there is satisfaction in allowing remnants of the past to witness your rise. Even now, I can remember the way Margaret had glanced at me in disbelief. Her calculated demeanor faltered the second she realized she had misjudged me. That moment, frozen in time, was mine to replay. I can see the tremor in her hands, the panic in her eyes. I can feel the rush of vindication that followed. It is a memory that will remain quiet and potent, like a secret kept in the folds of my mind. Mark's absence leaves an echo. I do not mourn it. I do not wish him harm. I simply accept that some people cannot be trusted. Some people cannot be part of your story any longer. That acceptance is part of what it means to reclaim your life, to rebuild the boundaries that were broken, and to recognize that betrayal does not define Met. Illuminates my capacity for patience, for strategy, and for power when wielded correctly. I take walks now, breathing deeply. Each step on the pavement feels deliberate. Each glance at the neighborhood reminds me that life continues, indifferent to the dramas we endure. And yet, it also reminds me that the choices I make matter. That observation matters. That vigilance matters. Because the world is full of people like Margaret and Mark, people who will underestimate your resolve, who will attempt to manipulate your life. What matters is how you respond. At night, I sit by the window, listening to the wind whisper through the trees, the city faintly alive in the distance. I reflect on the months of planning, the hours of observation, the sleepless nights of anticipation. Each moment had been preparation for this climax. And now, in the aftermath, there is satisfaction that is quiet but all-encompassing. It is the kind of satisfaction that comes from knowing that justice, however delayed, has been precise, calculated, unmistakable. There is no forgiveness here. There is no letting go of what was attempted. There is only recognition that strength and intelligence prevail over arrogance and deception. That the person who seeks to manipulate, to control, to erase another will ultimately meet the consequence they designed for someone else. That lesson is mine, and it is permanent. I think about the future differently now, not naively. Not in ignorance of the dangers or betrayals that may come, but with a keen awareness that I hold the power to protect, to act, to reclaim. Every day is a choice, a decision about who I allow into my life and who I let influence it. That choice is sacred, and I guard it fiercely. The house feels full again, not with fear, not with anger, but with possibility. The rain has stopped. Light streams in, soft and golden. Shadows play along the walls, shifting and changing, reminding me that time moves forward, and so must I. I am not defined by what was stolen, or by those who sought to diminish me. I am defined by how I rise after betrayal, by how I reclaim what is mine, and by the quiet strength that grows in the spaces they thought they could occupy. I take a deep breath, fills my lungs and steadies my heart. The wind rustles the curtains, the city hums in the distance. I am here, I am present, I am unshaken. And I know without doubt that if anyone ever underestimates me again, they will learn the hard way that patience, strategy, and courage always outweigh arrogance, greed, and deceit. If this story gave you chills, hit that like button. Tell us in the comments about your most satisfying revenge story. And subscribe for more gripping tales of justice, betrayal, and triumph. Remember, patience and strategy often win where anger alone cannot.